Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be my birth story. So I'm going to do a little disclaimer first. I do not have the easiest births. So if you are pregnant or getting ready to deliver a baby, I'm going to suggest that you skip this video. I am all about watching positive birth stories and experiences, especially before giving birth. I don't feel like it's a good thing to put negative thoughts in your mind before going through such a huge thing. This is not like a happy delivery story. It was actually pretty traumatizing for me. So please, if you're getting ready to deliver a baby, skip this video and watch it after you have your baby. Yeah, I just wanted to throw that out there. So with that being said, I am filming this video mainly because what I experienced and went through when I got home from the hospital and was kind of researching what had happened to me. I was unable to find a lot of information about it, and more so, not even information about it, just more so like being able to find people that I could relate to that had been through the same thing that I had gone through. So I wanted to share my experience, and hopefully if this is something that you experienced, please know that you are not alone. Feel free to reach out to me. I mean, this was like very traumatizing for me to go through. Probably the most traumatizing thing that I've been through. And my first birth with my daughter, who's now 3, was extremely traumatizing as well. And this one tops that. So without further ado, if you guys are new here, my name is Linny. This was baby number 2 for my husband and I. So we have a 3-year-old, like I had mentioned, little girl. And now we have our little baby boy. So we are very, very excited. Baby was a boy. We didn't find out throughout our pregnancy what we were having, and we had a boy, so that is very exciting. We have our girl, we have our boy. I would have loved more kids, but after this birth, that definitely probably will not happen for us, unfortunately. But we're very blessed and excited that we have 2 healthy little babes. We did conceive both of our children through fertility treatments. We did IVF, which is in vitro fertilization. And so, yeah, let me get into this crazy, crazy story. So I went in at 38 weeks for my growth scan because my daughter was 8.5 pounds and I had her by C-section. So I wanted to try for a VBAC. I went in for my growth scan at 38 weeks and found out that baby was breech, which means that the baby was head up instead of head down. So at that point, baby also measured 8'3". They were measuring baby, and they also had said that babe's head was in the 99th percentile. So telling me my kid has a big head. Those are all not good things for having a VBAC, which is a vaginal delivery after a C-section. So at that point, I started convincing myself that I was going to have another C-section. There are things that you can do to try to turn baby. They do something called I believe it's an ECV, where they manipulate your stomach and manually turn the baby somehow while still in your stomach. My doctor did not feel like I was a good candidate given the size of the baby, and also because I had already had a cesarean. So throughout that week, I did try to do things to just naturally turn the baby. I did moxibustion, which is basically, it looks like a cigar. This sounds so crazy. And my husband probably thought I was crazy too. basically you take this thing, it looks like a cigar, you light the end of it, you hold it on the outside of your baby toe for 15 minutes on both feet. So that was quite the experience. I tried to do some different positions, like from spinning baby, and then I went and got a massage that specifically was supposed to help with rotating the baby. Those are the only really 3 things that I did. So I went in and had that ultrasound done on a Friday. And that following Monday, I went in and seen my OB. So it was only like 2 days later. And my OB checked me. She said to me, I feel like the baby is head down. I've been doing this a really long time. She's older, so she has been doing this a really long time. And she said, you know, people make mistakes, but this is not a mistake that I make very often, and it feels like the baby's head down. So she went and grabbed an ultrasound machine, and sure enough, somehow within that week, baby flipped and was head down. So at that point, what we had decided to do was to go ahead and schedule the C-section for 39 weeks, which was at the end of that week. And then basically what my doctor told me was when I go in for my scheduled C-section, that I could basically decide then. So take all week and think about it. And when I go in at 39 weeks, if baby is still head down, then if I want to be induced instead of having the C-section, then I can do it then. She really didn't want to let me keep going because she didn't want the baby to get too much bigger since it was already measuring at 8'3". Now for a C-section, I did a lot of research on this, and if you've had a previous C-section and you want to try for VBAC, it is best to wait and not be induced. You have a better chance of having a VBAC if you're not being induced. So I kind of told myself at that point, okay, if I don't go into labor naturally by Friday at 39 weeks, then I'm going to go ahead and just do a repeat C-section, because then at this point I had already convinced myself that I was going to have the C-section anyways. So that was my thought. Then bringing us to that Friday, I had not gone into labor. I was having like random Braxton Hicks here and there, but nothing consistent, nothing that felt like an actual contraction. So my C-section was scheduled for 7:30 in the morning, so we had to arrive an hour early. So we got up nice and early that morning. We got there at 6:30. Got there, we got changed. They put in my IV, and they immediately start giving me fluids through the IV. In this hour wait that we were supposed to have, they come in and tell me probably like around 7 o'clock that Momma had to have an emergency C-section. So it's just going to be a little bit longer. So then with that being said, I had said something to the nurse about having an ultrasound to see if the baby was head down. They brought in an ultrasound machine, and sure enough, baby's still head down. So then at this point, they were kind of like, are you sure you want to have a C-section? And I'm like, in my mind, and I said to them, no, actually, I'm not like 100% sure that this is what I want. I really don't know at this point what I want. So we spent the next hour and a half debating, should I just be induced at this point or should I go ahead with the C-section? Ultimately, it was my decision. I could decide whatever I wanted. Of course, I heard multiple different nurses' perspectives. I got to meet my surgeon, who was phenomenal, by the way, and she was really, really great with kind of walking me through the process of a repeat C-section opposed to being induced. And she even really, really touched base on more so the emotional feelings you feel with kind of giving up a birth that you had kind of dreamed about, basically. And it's something that's like really emotional, honestly, especially to me. To me, it was really emotional because when you have a repeat C-section, that means for me, C-section number 2, at the hospital that I deliver at, they don't allow you to have a vaginal delivery after having 2 C-sections. So with me agreeing to a repeat C-section, I was basically giving up the chance of ever having a vaginal delivery, which was something that I so badly wanted to have and experience. So it was hard. It was a really hard decision for me to make. You know, you're almost like mourning the loss of an experience that you really wanted to experience. That's the best way that I can put it. But the surgeon was just phenomenal. And then, you know, you get to meet the anesthesiologist, and there was also a resident that would be working with the surgeon. So you get to meet everyone that is going to be in the operating room with you during your C-section, and I got all of their opinions. And so my final conclusion was I decided to have the C-section, and I can go into so much more detail as to why that was what I decided to have. I'm not going to get into that in this video because it'll just be way too long. So, with that being said, around 11:30, they finally took me back to the OR. If you've never had a C-section or been in an OR before, it's very intimidating. I was extremely stressed out and extremely worried and nervous because I had a very traumatic first birth experience. So I was already, you know, kind of going into this with like not a really great mindset. So for this C-section, I got a spinal with my daughter because I had already been in labor for 50 hours with her. I had an epidural. So that was one big difference with this C-section compared to the last one. So with my daughter, my epidural that I had wore off about halfway through the C-section. So I felt everything on the right side of my body. It was really traumatic. The epidural for some reason only wore off on the one side of my body. So it was crazy. So the anesthesiologist this time was aware that had happened to me previously. So we did the spinal instead of the epidural, and she also gave me a really dense dose, is what she kept saying. It's a really dense dose of the spinal, which was kind of freaking me out more too, because I'm like, I don't, you know, you hear all these horror stories, okay? There's a lot that can go wrong with the spinal, with an epidural, with just birth alone. So again, you know, my mind automatically is like, oh my goodness, like, I hope I can walk after this. So the spinal is a really weird sensation. So they do it the same way that they do an epidural. You kind of have to hunch over so your back is like in a rounded, like C shape. That for me was okay. I was like extremely nervous. So I had a nurse standing in front of me, like helping me hold me. At this point, my husband was not allowed in the room until kind of everything was like ready to go. And the anesthesiologist behind me, and she was so great. She walked me through everything step by step, like to the point where she's like, okay, I'm going to touch your back now. She was really great. The spinal is like very quick. It probably only took 10 minutes from start to finish. And for me, it worked immediately. I mean, it was like as soon as she said she was putting the injection in, I could feel it hitting my toes. So, and that's like it's a really weird sensation. So I'll say it started in my toes and it like slowly crept up my body. And it is the weirdest feeling. So they have you sit on the edge of the bed when they do it. And then immediately after they inject it in your body, they take like the needle out of you. They don't leave it in like they do for an epidural. And they immediately have you lay down on the bed. As I'm like feeling the spinal like creep up my body, I started to panic because it's a really, really weird feeling. It almost feels like your like body is falling asleep, like that tingly feeling. And it was freaking me out to the point where my heart rate was rising and my blood pressure was rising. So the anesthesiologist, again, was so great. She was right by my head asking me, is everything okay? What does it feel like? Close your eyes, picture something good, take some deep breaths. You're going to be okay. So I think like it's a really weird feeling, first of all. And then second of all, the fact that you can kind of feel it moving up your body was really starting to freak me out, because the closer it was getting to my chest, the feeling that I had like in my chest was really, really scary to me. So then a couple minutes after they do the spinal, then the anesthesiologist will start testing the area to make sure that it is numb for surgery. So they do this basically with an alcohol swab, is what I'm assuming it was. And she rubs it on your cheek and she says, do you feel how this feels like wet and cold on your face? When I rub it on your stomach, you're going to be able to feel me kind of still touching you, but let me know if it feels cold. And when she did it, it was kind of like I could still somewhat feel her touching me, but it did not feel cold at all. It just kind of like I could feel her, I don't even know how to explain it, like kind of moving my stomach almost. I don't know, but it didn't feel cold. And then she kind of brought the cloth like up my body and she's like, let me know when it feels cold to you. So at that point, I would say it was probably right above my belly button where I could feel it start to get cold. And she said, okay. So in about 5 minutes, it's going to be like you're going to be completely numb. And you're going to be numb to about under your boobs based on where you're telling me you feel it cold right now. And in the meantime, they prepped me. So they wipe you down with all of this stuff to make sure that you're nice and sanitized and clean. And then I have microdermal piercings on my hip. So I used to have 3. I have 1 left now. It was a big ordeal the last time I had my C-section because you can't take them out. And it was a big ordeal this time as well. So that was kind of a little bit of a debate. And then they ended up just covering it with a bandage like they did the last time. So for me, because it was a big to-do with whether I wanted to have the vaginal delivery or the C-section, the surgeon recommended doing something that was actually really, really neat. And it was so sweet of her to even suggest this. So basically what they did was they hung a clear sheet behind the blue sheet so that when little babe was getting pulled out, they dropped the blue sheet down. So I couldn't see like any of the gory stuff, but I could see like the baby being brought up. And then they kind of brought him to the clear sheet and I was able to like put my face against his face, and it was a really sweet moment. And then too, because we didn't know the gender, I was kind of able to like witness it all with my husband. So it was really nice. With that, they let my husband in the room and they immediately get started. So before they start, you have to this is what I had to do anyways. I had to announce my first and last name. and what I was in there for, which was a repeat C-section. So I was completely numb, could not feel a thing. You do feel like a little bit of tugging and pulling, but I was like numb, could not feel a thing, which was great because that's one of the things that I was most worried about. Like I had mentioned before, they brought me in at 11:30 and my son was born at 12:19. So once they have you like all prepped and ready to go, I don't know exactly what time they like took the first cut, but shortly after, I would say 15 minutes max, the baby is already like being brought out of you. So the baby is born, basically. It is like a really fast procedure as long as everything goes as planned. In the first half, before baby was born, as I was laying there, I was trying to keep my mind off of like everything that they were doing. So my husband was actually playing videos of my daughter, and I was like, and like scrolling through pictures of her. So that's kind of what I was doing to keep my mind off of like everything else that was going around. So then, like I had said, probably about 15 minutes after they had initially cut me, they said they were going to pull him out, and they dropped the blue sheet that was hanging, and they held him right up to the sheet, and I was able to kind of like put my cheek against his cheek, and it was really cute. And then my husband announced the gender, which we had a little boy, like I had mentioned, and that was just like a very emotional moment, and I'm glad that everything went smoothly up until that point. And then it quickly took a turn for the worst. So with him being brought out, you know, it took a minute for my husband to announce what it was based on kind of like the position he was in. You couldn't really see. And I kept asking when he was born, like while they were holding him up, my first thought was, oh my gosh, he has a lot of hair. And then I was kind of thinking, is that hair or is it blood? And I remember I like asked a few times, does he have a lot of hair? And it was kind of like nobody really responded to me. Like they were all kind of focused on something else. And then they kind of quickly threw the blue curtain back up. So they did allow him to kind of be by me. I would say, you know, it felt like probably longer than it was. It was probably a good minute, maybe 2. I don't even know if it was 2 minutes before they threw the blue curtain back up and like whisked him away. Thankfully, everything with him was completely fine. When after your placenta is delivered, your uterus is supposed to naturally shrink back down to size. So when you're in the hospital, they will usually give you a form of oxytocin, which is usually Pitocin, which signals your body to contract the uterus back down. In my case, my uterus did not contract back down to size. So it was basically like just mush. It would not get firm at all. So therefore, because it wouldn't contract back down, I was basically hemorrhaging then, because there was nothing to stop the bleeding from where the placenta was attached to my uterus. With all of that happening, it quickly became very, very chaotic in the OR. I had, within, I would say, minutes, there were 3 anesthesiologists by my head. There were multiple nurses running in and out of the room. There were other surgeons coming in to consult with the surgeon that was there. And in the meantime, like, you have the sheet up. I'm fully awake, so I can hear everybody like talking, but everybody's like, it's just so chaotic, and you know that something really bad is going on. You just don't fully understand what. And the one sweet anesthesiologist that was in there with me the whole time was trying to explain things to me as it was happening, but they still want to keep you very calm because they don't want like your blood pressure or your heart rate rising. on top of everything else that's happening. Because my uterus wouldn't shrink back down, they call that uterine atony. I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly. And you hemorrhage blood at a very, very fast rate. So I would say probably within 5 minutes of them kind of telling me somewhat of what was happening, I had the head anesthesiologist then come over to me and ask for me to consent to a blood transfusion while I was still laying on the operating table. The amount of terror and just complete worry that I experienced while laying on the table, I literally thought I was going to die. I was laying there praying, like, out loud, to please let me live, to please not let me die, please let me get through this, because I thought I was going to die laying there. It was so, so scary. And my husband, of course, is like going back and forth from me to him. And, they did still allow Matt to bring over the baby so I could see him. And they even tried to let me, like, hold him on my chest to try to help, like, calm me, or to help naturally release oxytocin to hopefully help contract my uterus back down. What they decided to do was place a balloon. It's called a balloon tamponade or a Bakri balloon, something like that. So basically what it is a balloon that they fill with saline or some sort of solution. They put it in your uterus and they fill it up so that your uterus holds its shape firm. And they fill it up enough so that it's putting enough pressure on where your placenta was so that it stops the bleeding. So while I was in the OR, I lost 2/3 of the blood in my body. I lost the most blood in the hospital that day. And I got 2 liters of blood while I was in the OR. So the balloon that they place in your uterus has a tube that runs up the middle of it to the top of your uterus, because your uterus is more like egg-shaped. And the balloon that they place in you is more round, so it leaves like an opening at the top of your uterus. So the tube that runs through the balloon is open at the top where there's that space in your uterus, and it basically then will collect the blood that fills in that space, and it goes into a bag where they then can measure the amount of blood that is coming out of you. This is making me feel a little queasy talking about it. And then because my uterus just would not contract back down at all, like it was completely loose and flimsy, they also did a B suture is what they call it. So they actually kind of like folded my uterus up a little bit, I guess, and did a B suture. I'm not really, I didn't look too much into the B suture thing yet, so I can't explain it to you in great detail, but I know that they did that as well. And so once they had all of that done, they were able to close me. My blood pressure and my heart rate basically always stayed steady. They never dropped. And I never lost consciousness. I was completely awake and aware the whole time. Some of the things that I can remember happening, there was just so much happening, and like I was trying to listen to the surgeon that was on the other side of the sheet that was working on me, because I could hear her talking to the resident that was helping her, and then talking to the head anesthesiologist. The head anesthesiologist and the head surgeon that was working on me were completely phenomenal. I mean, everybody in the room was phenomenal, but those two saved my life. Like, they 100% are the reason that I am here right now. She did also massage my uterus for quite some time before they decided to put the balloon inside of me. I guess I'll touch base a little bit on my husband too. So obviously for me, it was extremely traumatizing, but it was also traumatizing for my husband. One of the things he had said to me once we got home was that there's like no feeling in the world like holding your newborn baby and thinking that your wife is not going to survive. The nurses were trying to calm my husband, obviously, in the OR, and wanted him to be strong, obviously, for me. They didn't want him walking back over to me while he was crying or, you know, freaking out himself. So he really had to hold it together. He said that he went through like multiple masks because they were just getting soaked from him crying. So, you know, when I was laying there, I do remember at one point, I remember thinking, what is that spot on your mask? And I never said anything, but I just kept looking at it and thinking like, why is that spot on your mask? And it was because it was wet from him crying. So, you know, I'm sorry. I didn't think that I was going to cry talking about this, but as hard as it was for me to lay there and think that I was going to die, it was equally as scary for him to sit there and think that I possibly wasn't going to be coming home with him. So, fortunately, I got out of the OR and into the recovery room. And that's kind of when the surgeon then came in and explained to me better what exactly happened. And there really is no reason as to why. They really don't know why my uterus wouldn't contract back down. There's many different reasons why it could happen. I guess you are at higher risk for something like that if you go through fertility treatments or IVF. And when you have a bigger sized baby, which he was born at 8'1", and he was 21 inches long exactly. My daughter was 8'8" and 21 1/4. So she was actually bigger than him. So they don't think it was because of his size, because my daughter was bigger than him. They sent my placenta off to pathology, and everything with the placenta looked completely normal. So that was fine. So they really don't know why that happened. It's just something that happened. The other thing I failed to mention was that when they pulled him out, actually the cord was wrapped around his neck 2 times. And they also kept saying that he had like an extremely long umbilical cord, which was nothing like alarming and doesn't mean that that's why that happened, but I remember they just kept saying like commenting on how long the cord was, and that thankfully I decided to do the C-section. This was one of the things the surgeon then was telling me after, because of 2 things. One, the cord being wrapped around his neck twice could have been extremely bad during a vaginal birth for him, and because of my uterus not shrinking back down. Had that happened in a vaginal delivery, I wouldn't have been in the OR, and I wouldn't have been like wide open on the table. So it would have been harder for them to find the source of the bleeding and stop it, which is really scary as well. So when I was in the recovery room, they continued to give me blood. So they brought me back to start the surgery at 11:30, and it was probably a little after 2 that I finally was out of the OR. And then while I was in the recovery room, which the surgeon had actually said to me with the amount of blood that I had lost, they should have taken me to the ICU, but that they were just going to monitor me really closely in the recovery room for a few hours. So I don't think we actually got to then. We were moved to a room that's like a step down from the recovery room, where they monitor you much closer. So it was probably like around 5:30 or 6, I would say, when they took us to that room. So in the meantime, while I was in the recovery room, you know, the surgeon went over everything again that had happened with me. They brought in an ultrasound machine and they did an ultrasound on my stomach, to make sure that everything still looked okay with the balloon and everything. They drew on my stomach with a Sharpie marker where, like, how high my uterus was. And then they wanted to make sure that it obviously wasn't getting any higher than that. They did still come in and frequently, like very frequently, much more frequently than they did with my daughter, like come in and check my uterus to see where it was. You know, when you have a baby, they come in and they press on your stomach. And when they're doing that, they're checking to make sure that your uterus is still firm and that it's shrinking back down to size so that you don't hemorrhage. Painful as that is to have done, it is like one of the most important things that they could do for you while you're in the hospital, believe it or not. While I was in the recovery room, I did like develop the shakes, where it's like your body shakes uncontrollably. With my daughter, I actually got the shakes while I was in surgery. This time it probably happened about a half hour after surgery. And it lasted for about an hour, I would say, at least. One of the weirdest things was when they were cleaning me up after the surgery and they had taken the blue sheet down in the OR. To see them move your legs for you and like completely have zero feeling in them was like the weirdest sensation. Like I couldn't even watch. Like I had to turn my head away and close my eyes, because to watch them move my legs and like have absolutely no feeling in them was such a weird feeling. I can't even explain it. It was just, oh, it was freaky. So that really freaked me out too. But anyways, it was while I was in the recovery room. It was probably just, I would say maybe an hour and a half after my surgery that I realized I could finally like wiggle my toes a little bit. It was about a good 6 hours, I would say, 6.5 hours that I had no feeling in my legs. And then by the time they wheeled me back into the other room, they actually had me move from the one bed to the other, like kind of slowly. I was able to like lift my butt up off the bed with my legs. So at that point I was like regaining feeling in my legs. So then the next 12 hours were pretty crucial because I had the balloon in my uterus. So I was on loads of antibiotics because now I have a foreign object in my body. And the next 12 hours, they monitored me like crazy. They monitored my blood. They asked me millions of questions. They took my blood pressure and my temperature to make sure I wasn't getting an infection or like internally bleeding, which they do when you're in there anyways, but this was like, they were in my room every hour. So then at that point I had 2 IVs. I had one in this arm and one in this arm. The one was for all the blood I was receiving, and then the other one was for the fluids and the antibiotics that I was getting. So that whole night I could barely sleep because I was obviously traumatized from everything that had just occurred. Plus, I still had this balloon inside my body that I was then panicking about because they can only leave it in for about 12 hours. 24 max. And then they have to drain the fluid out of it and pull the balloon out, which is totally fine. That part honestly doesn't hurt at all. Like I didn't even feel the balloon come out, honestly. But what they hope for is that when they pull the balloon out of you, your uterus naturally contracts back down. And if it doesn't, then you start hemorrhaging again and you have to be rushed back to the OR. So I was absolutely, completely terrified. At this point, I'm already traumatized, and now I'm terrified for them to take this balloon out because I don't want to hemorrhage again. They came in probably around 5:30, 6 a.m. and told me that they were going to take the balloon out now. I hadn't obviously been able to get out of bed at this point. I had the catheter and the other tube that runs through the balloon coming out of me. And then I'm hooked up still to all these different IV meds and whatnot. So the doctor that was there then was the one that removed the balloon. And they do it very slowly with a syringe. They basically drain the fluid out of the balloon, like little by little. They just gently pull the balloon out of you. In the meantime, they are pressing on your stomach to see if your uterus is shrinking back down. And like I had mentioned, they had marked with a Sharpie marker where my uterus was. And it never went higher than that. And then once they pull the balloon out, they want to make sure that it is going down, that is shrinking back down to size. So luckily, in my case, it did shrink back down with the balloon being taken out. I am so, so, so lucky to be here and be able to tell this story right now. I am so thankful for life that I cannot even explain it to you. I am just so grateful to be here and to have 2 healthy kids and just to be able to live and enjoy life and enjoy my children. I am forever grateful. I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. I don't even know if I should say that. Was it enjoyable? I don't know. But hopefully it was maybe informative, or if anything, if you have gone through something like this and you need someone to talk to, I'm here for you, girl. I know I've been there. I've experienced it. I hope that you didn't have to go through anything like this, but if you did, please feel free to reach out to me and I can help you in any way that I can. So stay on the lookout. Make sure you guys are subscribed so that you don't miss when I post my postpartum video or videos. So yeah, I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye.